So as I look around the table, the only one that's not here is Councilman Loretano. She may be coming in late. Unfortunately, she had, well, I don't know how unfortunate it is, but she had a court case this afternoon, so she's going to come as soon as possible. So let's start with A on the agenda. City staff will review the FY 12-13 draft budget, and we're going to have Brian Dahlke and Terry Canada. So who begins?
It's mine.
Actually,
Terry's going to take care of that. All right, Terry. Nice to see you again, Terry. Thank you.
It's actually going to be the Terry Larry show tonight. And
all right. We'll go with that.
so tonight I bring before you the proposed staff draft budget. There's a few more sessions in which we will have budget information, but they're more of a formal adoption coming forward for tentative and final adoption. Just a brief agenda tonight. I'm going to review again the budget process, where we've been, where we're at. Again, an overview of some major general fund revenues and expenditures. Briefly touch on the capital improvement program. I'm going to turn it over to Larry at that time. He's going to talk about not only the debt service as well as some discussion on property taxation valuation and some other coordinated topics. You will find that there'll be a change in the presentation that we put together. It just seemed to be more organized for me to finish up going through operations and capital and then switch the related debt and property and that discussion over to Larry. I think at slide 12, like I said, we'll have a change. You do have some new slides in front of you. There's two on valuation and then commercial and residential property. That's what the color slides are for. We'll offer up time at the end for discussion and then again, 3 final steps to come. With that, very quickly, I'll just go through the budget calendar. You notice we've had a number of work sessions. I will, in a minute, talk about the budget forum that was held last Wednesday night. Tonight we're on 5-7, which is the draft budget, and 3 sessions to follow. With the fiscal year 13, there was a number of opportunities for public involvement. We did have all of the work sessions available on Granicus. We also have published the budget forum was in the newspaper. We will be publishing the formal budget schedules, which will come after the tentative, and then a number of other things. There's information that's available on the city websites. We do have the presentations from each of the work sessions and council meetings on there, as well as there is an avenue through Gov Q&A for folks to answer any questions, and then those are forwarded to the appropriate staff for answer anything from the budget or any other questions regarding city business. Take a little time to talk about the forum that we had last Wednesday night. We actually held it here for the first time. It was, I don't know if you want to say, it was on Granicus, so it was recorded and it was live. So I guess for that matter, it was produced, as you could say. We've had
Could you tell the audience how many showed up other than staff at this meeting?
Sure. It was by budget standards and from experience, it was well attended. We actually had almost, there was probably 9 citizens that were here. The media also attended. A number of council folks were here. Thank you for that.
So basically what you're saying is, and we did advertise this, is that correct? And where did we advertise this?
We did advertise, again, on the website, as always we do. We had it in 2 local papers, the Southwest Valley Republic paper. It was advertised in the West Valley View.
And we had 10 people.
Yeah, there was probably 9 or 10 people.
Or 10 people.
And then the media was here also.
All right, thank you. I just wanted the public to realize that this was available. And so when later you hear comments that we weren't transparent, we didn't bring it out, this is the beginning of how transparent we want to be on this budget. And so I appreciate staff and I appreciate the presentation. And I'm not sure we have another one in line at all, but it was a great opportunity for people to ask questions. And by the way, the 10 people were there. Were there any questions asked?
We did have questions. There were, you know, how the forum was is that Brian actually gave discussions on the highlights and accomplishments, key projects going on around the city, and then city amenities and statistics. We talked about crime rate, citizen satisfaction, some of the awards that we've won, and then I had moved into more of the technical part of the budget. We did not get questions during the presentation from the audience. Afterwards, we really didn't have any, I guess, questions that were where people raised their hand and asked the questions. We did receive a couple of the cue cards that we provided.
Okay.
And then some of the finance staff had I had two people approach me with some general budget questions that we were able to answer.
All right, so were there any people that we needed to get back to on an answer, or did anything?
No, we didn't have any follow-up items at all. In fact, one of the questions that I did receive, I wrote down here, was from the gentleman, or that came on one of the comment cards, was about the ballpark debt. And I know Larry's going to go into detail with that tonight, and we had also covered it in a previous presentation.
Great.
Can I just add, that would have actually been the one thing that I felt we should have hit upon, was discussing that plan of action for the debt due in 2017 or whatever it is. So that's a good highlight, showing that we're trying to make prepared notions on that debt. Thanks.
And again, that is part of the presentation tonight.
Okay. All right.
far
Well,
as the
thank
debt
you,
goes.
and I appreciate the 10 people that attended it, and thanks to staff.
And I would also like,
Do we know what the viewer count was from the Granicus?
Lynn, the question
No,
was...
do we have, holy smokes. Do we have any idea what the viewer count was from Granicus that night?
Could we get
Just-
that, because
yeah,
that would be
sometime.
most helpful to council too. And how was the reception on? Do we have any complaints on reception to people's computers? Do we know that?
We didn't receive any technical complaints.
The only one that I heard was at the very beginning of my presentation, the sound was not coming through, and that was picked up real quickly and was fixed.
Okay,
So
good.
the start of it was not. They had the audio or the video, not the audio, but that was fixed real quickly.
If we can, it would be very helpful as we've gone through all these presentations and tonight to have that information, to know how many people are listening on to this that are not in the audience. So if we can kind of get can we get an actual history of it? Okay. I think that just would be wouldn't you all appreciate knowing that? I would.
I would.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
In addition to the forum that we held last Wednesday night, there is one other opportunity on June 25th. There is, it's actually a state mandate that we have a public hearing in regard to passage of the budget. So I wanted to point that out. There's another opportunity for public input. The budget process this year actually starts in the fall. Again, we have done a number of steps as far as staff to analyze data, get requests from the departments as far as their needs, balance a budget, review that with management, come back to council on a number of work sessions. We have held a total of 5 dedicated work sessions just for the budget only. In addition to that, we have budget briefings, again, as I've alluded to in previous presentations, probably, do we remember how many hours? Probably about 16 sessions we had with the staff and the city council. Again, moving forward, 2 important dates will be May 21st, adoption of the tentative budget, and the 25th, adoption of the tax levy. There is one final step in there that comes the second Monday in July.
Joe?
Can we go back to the one slide back just for a second? Low crime rate. I think that's real important, and I don't know if we can get the chief to address that, but it's my understanding those numbers total have been going down consistently over the last several years. And if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere where others have been going up, ours have been going in the other direction. So I think that's an important highlight, in these environments and resources. You're doing more with less and getting good results. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about that specific piece there.
Gladly. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Yeah, we've been on the decrease as far as crime for about 5 years now, and which says a lot, like you said, doing more with less. And I can tell you that some of the other communities, such as, Surprise, Glendale, some of the other West Valley communities have been seeing just the opposite, where they have been going up a little. So, part of that's due to our proactive approach, the good job that we're doing. We're just very fortunate, and hopefully we can continue that trend.
Okay, and again, the reason why I want to mention it, because I've seen it in ComStat. I know by visiting some of your presentations at ComStat, the whole idea is with the automation is to move resources wherever the issues are, which helps you manage your resources better. So, I'm pleased with where we're kind of going with that. That's why I want to make sure we mention it here tonight. Thank you.
Sure. And part of just one more additional thing, part of the restructuring that we just did, which I'm going to talk about in an upcoming meeting, will help that. And again, we're being more efficient. Our police service officer positions that we're going to be able to incorporate will help our response times. And again, it all goes back to the big picture and helping that crime rate go down.
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts.
Thank you.
Just a couple highlights from the draft budget. The total budget this year is estimated to be $192 million. Again, over the next couple weeks, we'll be working diligently to put all the numbers together. Based on our estimates right now, it represents about a 10% decrease from the prior year budget of $215. It's mainly attributable to less capital spending, as we've discussed before. I'm pleased to say the operating budget is structurally balanced. It's estimated to be right around $77 million. That's a 7% increase from the prior year budget. Total capital budget, $4.3 million. Main focus there is on transportation and street needs, and it does include a number of master plans to prepare for the future.
Yes, Joanne.
On the rescinding the liquor license renewal fee, we haven't had a whole lot of discussion on that. I'm certainly behind having that for the restaurants. Have we discussed, or is it even possible that this does not include like Circle K's, convenience stores, or do they do that anyway? Or is it only restaurants pay that liquor license fee?
Mayor Lord and Councilman Osborne, we have approximately how many renewals, Lynn?
We had almost 80, 78, 77.
80 renewals, and so the action here that's proposed to be brought forward within the budget process at adoption is to not charge a renewal fee for anyone that sells liquor, has a liquor license. The estimated revenue that would be non-generated by that, lost if you could, would be about $50,000, $55,000.
But okay, but are you saying that included in those 70 to 80 renewals are restaurants and convenience stores, I don't know, is that everyone? Is it possible? I don't know how council feels. I guess maybe we can't do it that way, splitting it up, that it's only on
Gary?
What I want to do is ask our attorney whether we can differentiate in categories based on whether they are a restaurant or they are something else, and determine whether we want, how do we want to direct this fee reduction.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think when you start looking at the fee, if you want to differentiate the usage, you have to look at what the cost is generated by that business. So I think it's possible. I think the cleanest is probably either have the fee or don't have the fee. But if you're going to start trying to differentiate the use, you probably need to start looking at a fee study of some sort, because you have to have a cost associated with providing the service that generates the fee.
So we couldn't justify the fact that a convenience store necessitates more police response without studying it at some cost to justify differentiating between restaurants and just bars and convenience stores.
So I think what you got to look at is what is the service that's being provided that the fees associated with, and typically it's the administrative costs of maintaining the program, not the public safety response.
Okay.
And I think that's what went into our fee study. I could be wrong on that. We'd have to look at what the underlying assumptions were on the fee study and assessing the fee, and then see whether you can make a differentiation on the uses at that point.
Okay.
So
Joe?
we can look at that. if
No,
it's something else the council's interested in.
that you've provided the answer. Now we have to discuss
Joe?
whether we want to do this on a broad basis totally, or do we want to look at differentiating certain categories and go from there? And I'm going to kick the ball to
Joe?
some other people.
I recall earlier when we were having this discussion, I had an issue with the renewal on the restaurants because we're paying the 4% sales tax above and beyond what the others. And technically, it's a gross receipts tax, even though they collect it from their customers, it's a tax on business that's passed on to the customer. So technically, gross receipts is a tax on business. It's not a tax on the end user, even though they end up passing costs. With that, I was looking and I asked if we could separate, since they're paying 2% or a point and a half more than everybody else, if we could separate those two based on that, so that they got the break, the eating places and the restaurants got the break of the renewal versus the ones that don't pay the additional point and a half. That's where I was coming from, and I don't recall us ever getting anything back to say that we could or could not differentiate. I'm following up to what the Vice Mayor has mentioned and
Brian?
Councilman Gagger. So.
Just for clarification, the clerk's office, when they looked at the total number of renewals, we have about 80, as was stated. 2/3 of those are restaurant. So the remainder would be non-restaurant, and those, looking at the amount of service to those for the reauthorization or the renewal, is not much staff time. Then you have to look at what's the actual cost associated with that. And that's where we'd have to do the differentiation. But just to be clear, 2/3 of all of those are already restaurants for that, how much, $55,000 in revenues.
Can we hold off, I guess, Terry, without committing this to the budget, could we leave this in the budget and do a little more work on this before we have to make a decision, or does this have to be in the budget or not in the budget?
Maybe Larry wants to answer that?
I'm sorry,
Looking like
Larry.
you,
I can feel.
I think where we have the budget today is that we have left it out. You can always add it back, but my suggestion from what City Clerk's office indicated and City Manager just indicated a few minutes ago, by the time you work those numbers through, you're talking about $10,000 to $15,000 total, and the effort of trying to substantiate that differential just may not warrant it.
But there's a principle.
That's it.
There are
It's setting the
principles.
precedent for the fact that we're only at 10% build out. I'm looking at the future of the city, and I see a complete difference between the two entities of a convenience store and of a restaurant. And back to Mr. Bazzillo's statement regarding, what tax is already put on restaurants, I just see a big difference. Now, I can understand leaving it out, but I would like us to come to a conclusion on if it's possible.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, what I'd probably suggest then is let us do the legal work and look at those fee categories and just give you an opinion back on if you can make that differentiation in good faith. If that works, then you can make a policy decision.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Yes, Joe.
I tend to agree with, I think, with the Vice Mayor, and I just don't think the restaurants themselves, I'd like to see that go away for that. So I think we're there. It's just a matter of, can you split it out?
If we can substantiate,
Gary, would you please just let me know, because I'm looking at someone else. I don't know who I have to. Gary, go ahead.
I was going to support Councilman Pizzillo's position that if we can substantiate this on some legal, ethical, financial, cost accounting basis, then I would like to go with take the restaurants out and leave everybody else in the system.
Wally?
I have a couple questions. I'd like to know, and I don't have to know tonight, but maybe you can tell us when you come back with your legal opinion, if other cities charge a liquor license renewal fee, and if so, how much? And
I think we have that information
Well, and
somewhere.
I can't remember. And does any other city separate restaurants from convenience stores? Thank you.
Thank you. Bill? Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
Yes,
City Manager.
just wanted to point out we can absolutely do that. We have looked at what other cities do, but that we can provide it at the same time we get the legal opinion, so you get it all in one shot.
That'd be great. Bill?
Oh, yeah, the last country left to be heard from.
Albania.
the whole point of the liquor license renewal fee is the fee incurred. It's a fee to cover the costs of processing the license renewal, correct? I'm looking around the table. Somebody, isn't that what the point of the fee is?
$650 to process it?
Correct. So if we say $650 is a perhaps a fee that is high for that service, then shouldn't we be looking at eliminating that fee for everybody who's paying it rather than just for the convenience stores versus the restaurants? I understand Councilman Pizzillo's perspective on they're paying, there's additional tax involved, et cetera. I get that. But we're actually talking about two separate things. One is a fee and one is a tax. And I have a hard time saying we're going to, because you own a liquor store, if I can throw back to the old days, or a convenience store, you're going to pay more than if you own a restaurant for exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
Joanne?
I have to think this through. I'll have to come back to this debate.
Joe?
I disagree. They're not exactly the same thing. One's paying 4%, the other's paying 2.5%. So it's a gross receipts tax. You can say they're passing the costs on, but it's a tax on the business that truly is what a privilege tax is. They're two different things.
I'm going to leave my opinion until we get the legal advice before I discuss this any further, because we could go on and on about the morality of this and so forth and so on. So can we agree to table this and until we get this information? And I guess it's a time frame in which everybody, I guess it's kind of, you're going to have to get this within the budget time frame. So,
We can get this back pretty quick.
all right, great. Appreciate it. Go ahead, Terry.
And jumping back a couple points, the budget does fund all the core services. Again, there's not an effort to enhance service levels, with the exception that we discussed with the PSO, 2 positions out of police. It is representative of the second year of the food tax, food for home consumption sales tax rate. It does lower the rate to 2%. As far as renewal fee on the liquor license, technically we will just follow your direction, and it would either be incorporated with verbiage at final adoption with the resolution, which comes on the 26th of June, or not. So we'll follow through on that.
Joanne?
Just as we are moving forward on the food for home consumption sales tax, I believe, is it October that we were going to have a discussion about taxes citywide again? Was that coming forward?
City Manager?
Yes, we were looking at tax policy discussion coming in the fall. We are targeting end of September, October. At this point, we are looking at October, but that would be on all taxes that the city enacts right now.
Okay. I myself would like us to take another 0.25% off, but I know that we are not fully aware of what that figure may be. So I'm willing to wait till October. In going forward, I know that we did a quarter last year. We're doing a quarter this year. Was there another plan of another, or that's you,
No,
the
this is
direction
it.
you've been given so far was that's where it's been? Okay, I say go another
Yes.
quarter, but we'll talk about that. We'll hit that in October. Thank you.
I think it's always good to not make any rash decisions on a lot of number of things of cutting things until we see what revenue is, until we see what each small step takes. And if we see that that's in the realm of what we can do, when you take it away, you're not going to get it back. There's no way. So we have another tax we have to look at, and we all know that next year. So we need to be careful, and until we discuss the other tax, and that's that the half-cent, and your stance on that. Let's not be throwing too many things in until we have that discussion, which is supposed to be next year. Joe?
I just want to throw this out to the members of the council. Is last year, as a result of various events, it became effective January 1, as you all recall. And if we get into a process where we're routinely lowering this down, whether it's the half a cent or whether it's the food tax. Do you think it makes sense to be consistent on every period of time we do it at the same time instead of changing those dates, especially for business? And the only reason why I mention that is should we keep January 1 our date only because if we do it again, everybody gets used to that date because that's when we started it. If we start moving around, one year it's September, another year it's October, another year it's January, I'm not sure how that'll go across in the business
Oh,
community.
I totally agree with
Excuse
you.
me, Wally has the floor next.
So
I agree.
Please identify yourself because we can, you have the floor.
Mayor, I agree
Yes, Wally.
with Joe. Thank you.
No, I agree
Wynn?
with you, Joe. I think that for the businesses especially, that is important. It was the fact that we were going to discuss it in October. I knew it wasn't going to happen then, but I think that there should be, a method to our madness here, and everything needs to be on the table. And really, I guess because I say so quickly that I would go for another $0.25 is because that when we were looking at originally, we thought it was going to be $350,000 for a year. Now it's looking like it's only $250,000. So it seems to be a lot less than that was anticipated. But there again, October we'll see some true numbers. So I appreciate waiting.
Yes, Wally.
I do have one more question. Larry, may I ask you this? If we lower the tax again, will we run into the same, I don't want to say obstacle, but will we run into the same problem with those that give us permission to do this?
The
Will
Model
they have
City
to have a
Tax Code
special
Commission. Yeah.
meeting
no.
and all of that?
It was wording in the sales tax code that had to be approved by the Model City Tax Code Commission.
Okay.
Once they approve the wording that allows us to have a different rate from the sales tax, we can adjust it again. So this one will not be held up that way.
Okay, but I still think doing it January 1st would make sense and stay consistent to the same time each time we do something like that. Thank you.
Terry, go ahead.
And the final point here is the draft budget does include appropriate levels of contingency
Can
reserve.
everybody hear Terry in the back?
Not very well.
You're going to have to pull that up to you, Terry, please. Thank you.
And we took direction. We had conversation in here a number of work sessions back about the general fund contingency in particular and not adding to that year over year. It will remain at 4 months. However, there will not be additional funding based on the prior year expenditures added to that to increase that amount.
Yes, Bill.
I want to clearly, publicly state it. We are not lowering the reserve level, correct?
Correct. We are not lowering the reserve, and per council's direction, we will not be adding funding to that reserve amount for fiscal year 13 budget.
Thank you.
Just so I understand.
Yes, Gary?
I'm sorry. Just so I understand this, we're going to maintain, we have 16.3 in the reserve fund, and we're going to maintain that level until it no longer supports 4 months of operation, and then we're going to start adding to it. Is that our new policy, or Larry's shaking his head?
If I could answer that, because if we've misunderstood, I guess, or if I've misunderstood, my understanding of what the council talked about was to not increase it, but that the 4 months might become 3 months before you would look at increasing it. That's what I thought the direction of the council was. So today, or fiscal year 12, 4 months was the 16 million that we have in there.
Right.
Right.
When it gets down to that 3 months needs more than that 16 million, that's when there would be another increase to that reserve. That was my understanding of the council direction.
That was my understanding. Let's go around and nod. Let me see your head nodding.
I agree.
Why not?
I agree.
And just for a brief explanation for the public that's listening, the reserve policy now is calculated based on 4 months' actual expenditures from the prior year. So as the expenditures go up following the budget pattern, you would, by policy, increase the contingency reserve for the next year. And so what was decided is that we would not increase that, even though perhaps when year-end closes 12, the expenditures for the first 4 months may have increased.
Thank you.
Again, the budget approach that we've taken here, again, echoing what we've said on a number of sessions we've had, hold the line on operating expenses. The departments came into this. They were required to just balance out base to base year, and then we did look at a supplemental process and added where needed, where perhaps for utilities where the costs are going up and they couldn't absorb it, or the base budget just wasn't adequate to maintain the current service level. It does meet the community needs. It has an emphasis on quality of life. We have not reduced any of the budgets. I'm happy to say back to a couple years ago when we did have to cut back on a number of base budget items. We did reduce the food tax as instructed by the council, and repetitively it provides for adequate reserves. Just briefly here, I want to demonstrate, we probably won't.
Could I hold you just one moment? Joe?
Just real quick on the funded depreciation, I looked through the presentation and I didn't see that specifically addressed, unless I missed it on the PowerPoint. Are we setting aside some money this year to cover various funded depreciation? And if so, how does it equate to our depreciation schedule? And are we there, or what percentage are we of meeting our depreciation schedule?
Madam Mayor and council members, there is $1.7 million budgeted as one-time expense for reserve payments. The bulk of that is 1.5, I believe, for 1.2 for fleet, 250 for IT, your servers, your PCs, your electronic components and such, and then another $250,000 for risk management, which would be for claim reserve. Okay. We had talked with, working with the Public Works and the Fleet Services, we do have a very detailed replacement plan of what should be scheduled for replacement. And again, it's when you buy it, what the useful life is. A number of variables come into play there. We are funding that at, I want to say, upwards to 90%. Again, we, as things wear out faster than they're scheduled to do, that list is kind of rotating and changes. It's dynamic. It's not a fixed list. The two major things coming out of that will be the fire trucks you'll see over the next 12 to 18 months.
Joe?
As I recall, that's getting better than what we were last year, because I don't believe, if I recall correctly, we were around 90%. We were less than that, weren't we?
We were, I want to say that the ongoing commitment for this year, Ken, is it 1.8 we're scheduled at? I think it was higher. It fluctuates year to year, depending on what we're replacing. Again, the fire trucks drove that replacement for the year up because they're very expensive. I want to say next year's schedule, if we replaced everything that was on there, was a little bit lower this year. So that's why the percentage is
Could you repeat what he just
closer.
said,
It
please?
is lower.
Thank you.
Schedule replacements for this year.
Wally?
On the previous slide, Terry, where you say maintain current service levels, this is with us having a once a month garbage pickup, right?
Are you referring to the bulk trash? It is in keeping with the presentation that was done. I believe we were here last week, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but I'm just saying we're not maintaining current service levels if we're going to reduce the bulk to once a month. So perhaps we just need to say something. I don't want anyone to come and say, well, you said you're not going to cut anything, and here you're cutting my garbage or my bulk trash once a month.
For those people that we're not in
That we're not in the work session. And, yeah, right.
Okay, I can see where they could misinterpret that.
Yes, that's-
But the public, just to make this clear, chose to do that.
They chose it. They did.
But yes, I can understand your concern about the wording. Joanne?
Actually, to that, and I don't know how we're going to discuss some of the other questions. I have multiple questions out of the actual budget book
Okay,
itself.
let me just interrupt.
ahead.
I should have said that at the beginning. I made a decision as the mayor and running this meeting tonight that we would ask questions at this time on the presentation.
Okay.
And then once the presentation's over, because I noted that a number of council people had questions on the book itself, the draft of the budget book. So I thought, let's let the presentation take place, and then after that, we'll go to the budget book. Is that, can I get some nods? Because that's the decision I made. That's what you're going to do tonight, but. But I thought this would be easier on you, Terry, not to jump around, so.
That's fine.
Okay.
I'll wait.
All right?
And again, briefly, I just want to demonstrate here that we are anticipating, again, this is very conservative, savings of $1 million from budget to estimate for current year. And as we had previously spoke about, and Larry will address in more detail with the debt financing on the ballpark, we are estimating just slightly under $1 million, surplus about $700,000 for the proposed budget moving forward next year. Again, this is general fund operating. A number of these slides are addressing the general fund, so I probably need to keep pointing that out.
I think if you do keep pointing that out, that's most helpful as you go on. Joe?
Just real quick, Terry, on the prior slide, that .6, and I think Larry's going to address it later possibly, but that built-in surplus, is that what's going into the debt service for the ballpark?
That is the proposed plan to not spend all of the available ongoing money and committed ongoing. Again, it is projected to be a surplus ongoing, which we would then dedicate to one time moving forward year after year.
But that's the pot that'll be available that's going to build for the principal on the ballpark.
That is correct.
Okay. Second question related to the same thing. The ongoing sources here show 66 million. What's the difference between that and the next slide with the general fund operating shows 63? Are there transfers or something that's between the two?
Madam Mayor and council members, there are. We do have some of the enterprise, well, as well, the enterprise funds transfer money in to cover the overhead. Again, this is for, there's a whole group of services that are provided through the majority of finance office for billing, collections, banking services for those enterprise funds such as water, wastewater, sanitation.
So the ongoing sources is not just general fund revenue, it's a combination of transfers ins, transfers out. That's available
Correct.
for the general
All
fund, okay.
ongoing money available to commit to ongoing
Okay.
expenditures.
Just want to clarify.
Again, briefly, the budget for fiscal year 11 was $61.9 million. We are estimating just slightly above that at $64.6 million for total revenues for the year. Moving ahead to 13, we are anticipating a 10% increase. It's primarily due to construction sales tax. It's up about 60%. We also did get a bump in state shared revenue. It was in the category of urban revenue sharing, which is your income tax. It remains strong. And then sales tax year over year, about 12% increase. The total estimated general fund revenues are coming in, or we're projecting for next year, about $68 million.
Joanne?
Okay, so that other category had a big difference. What is that? Not estimate to projected, but from last year. What does other comprise of?
The other category has any other kind of taxes that we would have in there. It also includes court fees, recreation fees. I'm trying to think. The CFD revenue is in there. We have any one-time payments that we would have got in from developer, one-time developer type reimbursements that someone was paying us for. The other increase, although it's slight, is the Litchfield Park fire agreement is in the other revenue.
May I ask a question, Mayor?
Yes, Wally.
Would the $1 million from ADOT be in there?
No.
No.
The $1 million from, unless it's in the construction sales tax category.
Okay.
We're welcoming Sherry Lorotano. Nice to see you.
Sorry.
No, they all understood. Joe?
Don't need an answer now, but could we just see what the estimates were for the, and it could be yellow paper, whatever, on the other, and That's like 3 times what was budgeted, what came in. I'm just kind of curious because the others are, percentages, but that's a pretty big gap. So something that explains the budget and the estimates in the other category.
Yes.
I think it's a good point.
On the other side, the budget for 12 is estimated to be, again, slightly below, or the estimate for 12 slightly below the budget of $57 million. Moving ahead to fiscal year 13, we are projecting about a 2% increase overall between the categories for general fund. This is a familiar slide. This is how the operating budget, again, how it is made up by function. This is not the general fund. This is the total all city. As you can see, no surprise, public safety represents the largest section at 38%. Next comes public works, which does include operating budgets from your enterprise funds. Parks and recreation and support services follow second or third at 11% each, and then general government and development services at 8%. I'm just going to briefly talk 2 slides about the CIP. We did have an extensive work session on that a few weeks ago. Total for fiscal year 13 is $4.3 million. Again, the main focus on the streets at $3 million. Total for the 5-year plan is $34 million. And again, of that, the majority of funding at $15.3 million.
We don't have
going
that
to
slide, by the
streets.
way, in our presentation, so if that's in the book. Pardon me?
At slide 12, we rearranged to keep the debt and the property tax and the related discussion that Larry's going to go to right after I finish this all together.
All right, thank you. Yes, Gary?
In the 5-year, I missed the 5-year work session, and I reviewed it and saw some of the projects, and there is one project that is not in the 5-year capital budget plan, and I would like to propose something to council. Several years ago, we started a monument program for the entrance to the city of Goodyear, and we started building monuments, and then we built 5 or 6 or 7 monuments, and then we built another set of monuments after there were some citizens who said, how come you're not continuing this project? And we did that, and then the hard times came, and so we no longer are building any new monuments. Yet we have annexed 67 square miles. We have areas on the western edges of the city of Goodyear that do not have monument signs. And so what I would like to propose is that we allocate somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 for next year's capital budget, and to see how many monument signs that we could build. And the source of funds I would like to recommend is council started off this year with $250,000 for council projects. We are utilizing $50,000 for the speed bumps in the neighborhood in North Subdivision. Okay, I would like to utilize some of council's discretionary money to put this in, and then I would hope that we could start every year putting, building more of these signs and erecting some of these signs. I really would like to see one in Mobile.
There's no place to put it in Mobile.
Well, once 83rd Avenue gets paved, I think we ought to put it, put a sign there that says "Welcome to Goodyear," because it is part of Goodyear, and we need to incorporate it. There has been a plan that has a whole bunch of places where these signs would be put down, and I would like to see that plan, 1, resurrected, and 2, funded over the next year.
Joanne?
On that note, and I understand your position, Gary, and yes, we did have that part of the art capital in the past, right? In the previous years, it was part of the arts budget. I thought was having the monument signs in there.
I thought it came out of, community development because they manage the project, but I don't
know.
care
But you're
where,
right. It was-
I don't
it
care
was.
who gets the money.
Can we ask staff right now, do you know? Does anybody in staff know where the signs came out of? Anybody that was?
I don't know if Harvey's here.
Okay,
Ken?
Harvey.
It was all general fund money,
One time.
one time.
It was one-time money.
So either using, development-related fees that were one-time or revenues.
Okay.
Is
We
what
have
funded
Harvey
that.
here. Harvey, any comment?
Mayor, Council, as you might recall, a previous council member had expressed some dissatisfaction over monument signs in the past and wanted to provide a more updated and nicer sign. And
Is
so,
that one council person?
well, several, but one in particular that initiated it and wanted us to move forward with that. And then we went through an elaborate process, and we hired a designer, and then we went through an RFP process. We had a design, we had a workshop, and picked a design. And so that program got kicked off the ground.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you down at the other end of the table. Are you saying we redesigned this? Or are you saying, no, the same design is?
No, the same design. I'm just
Okay.
saying that we
Okay.
coordinated the design. We have
All right.
a whole sign program, monument sign program that we adopted citywide, and this is the beginning of it.
Okay. I understand that the company that designed them is no longer in business. So I'm assuming this is going to take some looking into as to who could duplicate this and the cost of it. And so it's not something that's going to be easily done. Yes, City Manager.
You're exactly correct. The company that did provide this, that we went through the public process, is no longer in business. We do have the specifications, so those we do have, and then it'd be a matter of getting those back out on the street, getting some cost estimates, certainly resurrecting the plan as far as where they were going to be located. The costs at that time were $20,000 per monument sign. Don't know how that would hold today. Going back out, we'd have to find out if that would be more or less.
Joanne?
Well, on that, again, on that court, that was kind of something that I had also mentioned regarding our landscaping issues. And I know that we received a yellow paper on those things, and I believe that to fill in some of the plant life that's been gone for years was in the 40,000 range. And so I think that we do, as a council, need to have a discussion on some of these smaller, impactful items that really, the monument signs are part of our image. Landscaping is part of our image. Looking at, tangible items that are part of our city are important. Even though it sounds like, oh, we just spent a bunch of money on plants, it's still important. Something, though, for the future that I've brought up that's kind of a thinking in action, or a thinking in progress, but is for the future, is something that I'd like us to talk about, is our use of affluent water. And I've mentioned it to Brian, and I've mentioned it to Larry, actually, just in passing, but that's something for the policy-wise for the future of our city. We've been talking about infrastructure and getting that in the ground, and part of that importance is also the issue with affluent waters. And when I hear that in the past, I remember about a year ago or so, there was an issue with, I know the HOAs of Canyon Trails wanted to be able to use affluent water to take care of the parks and the right-of-ways, things like that. And we were about 1.5 miles away from the connectivity, so they couldn't use it. And I was just thinking for that great word of sustainability for the future of our city as we continue to grow, but saying, hey, let's put in 1 mile a year to connect us with these issues. We don't want to rely completely on groundwater for certain things. And I know that Brian was discussing our recharge credits or things like that. And that's just something that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention as we talk about policy planning for the future.
Could I suggest, as council brings up these, that we make this one discussion so that we can look at each of these, because it's going to cost, and so we have to make a decision what direction we want to go in and what we feel is most important at the time of the money that we hopefully will have to plan these. Joe?
Just a suggestion, you have that amount of money that Gary is mentioning. Maybe you might want to hold a workshop to discuss how you might want to break it up. Just a thought.
That, what I'm thinking of is,
Joanne?
I'm sorry, far more costly than our 250,000, I'm sure. It was just thoughts of the future. One last question, though. For the 5 years, I do not see anything in here about Loma Linda Park, because I only see the 250,000. Is that, can somebody help me with that?
Madam Mayor, council members, the park is, the $250,000 is for the master plan of the park.
And that's all it is. That's it.
And that's exactly what we had talked about for this budget year. Yes, Gary?
On the park issue,
It's not.
as Councilman Pizzillo pointed out, we are going to have one-time money that will be appropriated each budget year to get us to 2017, 2018, when we're looking at having that $4.5 million. So while it's not funded in this year's, in next year's budget, we, depending on where we are next December, January, we can look at some of these one-time funds that we can use for some of these items that are things that we want to do. As long as we don't look at funding an ongoing requirement, we are going to be in a position to do some of the nicer things that Councilwoman Osborne to improve the image and still be able to pay the ballpark off in, start paying the debt that we owe in 5 years because we have a pretty good plan on how to allocate the money. So I just toss the monuments out now. If you want to table that, that's fine. There are places in the budget that are placeholders, and we can come back to this and say, okay, we can utilize this money for these items as we see the trends going better.
Mike, did you have a comment on this?
Only if there was a question regarding Loma Linda and why it's not in
All right,
there.
would you mind addressing that?
Yes, related to that question, we will not have a cost estimate on the design until October. And because that design is very fluid at this point, we were not able to get an accurate number to include in the CIP in the 5 years. The anticipation would be is that we would bring it back to you for consideration potentially as a use, a funded, through one-time dollars.
I had a question on this side of the table. Wally?
I just, while I can appreciate the monument, putting the monuments up, I would like to table it for now and discuss it at another time.
Well, I think all of these additional things, and I think it's good that council's mentioning them so that we can record them. Sometimes when you're at these budget meetings, that's when you all get over these ideas. And so I think it's good to write them down, and we can look at them as total and decide at another time and discuss what's most important to all of us. I think all the suggestions are positive. It's just, as you know, until we're, it's always a money issue and how we want to expend that money. So, any other comments? Yes, Gary.
I would like to see us maybe address this in early fall, somewhere, once we have a 3-month trend of where next year's budget is, and we see some, we finish off this year. This would be a good, way, and if we address the items in the fall, then we give staff enough time to actually maybe start implementing some of these things in January as we push forward in the following budget.
Terry, go ahead.
Moving ahead, just the breakdown again of the capital improvement plan for fiscal year 13, the $4.3 million. Do want to note in here that in the streets, this is actually specific street projects. It is not representative of the street overlay program. That's in the HERF fund, and it's separate in the operating budget. We do have an impact fee study that we're going to conduct, a Parks Master Plan study, And then there is a business needs analysis for technology also in this plan.
Yes, Bill.
The impact fee study is required by Senate Bill 1525.
Correct, as a result of that legislation.
Would you just repeat that again, please, for the public?
1598.
No, this is 1525, correct? This is required by the state.
This is for us to have the fee and the new, or the study done and the new fees in place by
And this was
fiscal year
passed
14.
when?
This year.
Last year.
Just, for the public, just say it out loud to the public.
This was passed in last year's legislation, the
Yes, we-
1525.
And we've taken, there have been steps along the way for requirements. We actually did put new fees in place and set up separate funding as of January 1 of this year, so that we can begin tracking the fees with the new stipulations versus the old fees. So there are phases along the plan of implementation for that change.
Joanne?
I don't know where I messed this up, but I see under technology you have 153,000 budgeted and $1 million next year. I thought this was the year that IT was being taken care of. Now we're waiting until 2014.
The fiscal year CIP funding for technology is to do a business analysis for the enterprise replacement solution. It's scheduled to start in fiscal year 13.
I know.
Just a moment. Maybe have Kathy come up and just address that quickly.
I thought we were going this year. I mean in 13.
What we had intended on doing was it's an 18-month to 2-year solution with the business analysis to go through every department and conduct an analysis on all of the discrete business functions, and then develop an RFP for a solution to replace the existing solution, and then implement. So 18 to 24 months total. So the first portion is to do the assessment.
You don't have an app for that? I'm sorry.
Bill?
Thank you.
Bill?
Just to both the city manager, Kathy, you and I have had this conversation privately, that whatever we can do to move this along as quickly as we can. I know and I hate to quote Mr. Pizzillo as a former staff member, that HDE system's got to go, and whatever we can do to move that along quickly. I hope that government can move faster than 18 to 24 months. I just want to express that.
Wally?
Well, that was what I was going to say. I can appreciate having to do a study, but if a study takes 2 years to study it and then another year to put it in, we're so behind the dog it's not even funny. So if we can do anything to expedite it, I didn't realize it was going to take us 24 months to figure out what we need to use to make us so we're competitive with some of the other cities, but we've got to do something quickly. And also, is the impact fee study, Terry, going to be paid for out of impact funds?
That is correct.
Impact fees? Thank you.
City manager, you want to address that at all?
The best way to address it is we need to make sure that we get the right enterprise system in place. So part of that, when you go into, as Kathy alluded to, you go into each department, you look at all the business functions, you look at all the interrelationships between the departments, everything from finance to permits to fleet. I mean, they all can interrelate. So it's finding out what are those items that need to have software interrelated with each other. We can look at best of breed in some areas. We can look at which are kind of standalones for specific functions. There is a lot to this, and as part of that, and hopefully, Kathy, this is correct, but my understanding is as we go through this process, we're starting to begin to understand the different enterprise systems that would actually work. So by the time we get to the end of that, we'll have a very good idea of what can be implemented. Kathy, is that more or less still on target?
Yes, that's on target. And just for your information, we will be providing like an executive summary, maybe a yellow paper, and potentially even a work session specifically to talk about the history behind the solution, because there's new players now, or new council folks at the table. So just so you understand how long this has been going on and how many studies there are. And just to clarify, the 18 to 24 months is to begin the process and end the process. It's not to conduct a study to have a book. It's to actually complete a cutover.
Yes.
And if it can be completed more quickly, it will be. Obviously, we don't want to rush it to the extent where we're not doing it right, but that's a conservative estimate, 18 to 24, and we'll just see if we can beat that.
Joanne?
Well, I appreciate the information and I guess the uniqueness of Goodyear, but at the same time you sit there thinking, I can't believe we're the only city that could be like this. Somebody else has had to do this too, and that's what just kind of baffles me.
We were very slow at bringing technology to Goodyear.
Yes,
back
we were.
when I became a council member in 2005, it was loosely called technology.
It was. We've actually have studies dating back to 2003 looking at this application.
Yes.
There are a number of cities that either can't fund it or choose not to fund it, so it is not exclusive to Goodyear. I do studies all the time and communicate with neighboring communities to find out how they're addressing this, and there's a varying ways, and that'll be in the report that I provide to you with the summary in the background. That information will be in there, so you have something to compare it to.
Joe?
Just want to mention that I was part of the team that did Glendale's conversion of their PeopleSoft, HR, and financial. They're not easy by any stretch of the imagination, and when you think you got it all figured out, something pops up. So I would suggest it is important to make sure you clearly understand how all these are going to talk. It took us over 1.5 years to make that implementation once we decided what software we were going from. So it's not an easy thing. A lot of things can go wrong if it's not done right. So we need it, but I want to make sure we do it right, because if you do it wrong, it could be really, really ugly.
Wally?
Are we hiring a company to do this, or is it being done internally?
We're going to bring a consulting company in to help with that business analysis, because that is the more complicated part of it.
Okay, so when they get their report done, then you will come back to council to tell us what you need, and then we have to go out with an RFP to see if we can find a firm that can actually provide us what we think we need.
It would be commodity and services. So yes, the commodity, the product itself, and then the implementation services. Because like Joe had alluded to, and some of the other folks may have gone through this once before in a previous experience, and it is very complicated, and it's very expensive, and it's more expensive if you don't do it correctly. So
Want the
yes.
system to talk to each other.
Yeah, well,
If we instigate something and we can't talk to different departments and we can't get what we need, then we've just spent money on something that's
where we are today.
Yeah, that's where we are today. You're absolutely right. So as long as I understand the complicated part of this.
Well, if we hire a reputable firm, they ought to be able to tell us, and I don't want us to have to go through what we went through with our telephone system, of getting it and then it not being compatible to use it, and then we're stuck. We don't have a telephone system again. So that's what I'm just concerned about. But I would like Mr. City Manager to have an update as the process goes, to let us know where they are within, say, 6 months or a year, so that we, if this thing is really getting bogged down, it's going to be more than 24 months. I think we need to know that.
If there are no other questions on the capital plan, this is where I will turn it over to Larry to talk about valuation and debt service.
Good, Sherry. Thank you.
Okay, the first slide is we're going to go back a couple of slides prior to the CIP, but this first slide isn't in there. This was the handout. Thought I wanted to start, as we talk about property tax, to talk a little bit about our assessed valuation. The property tax levy, which represents the total amount of property tax that we expect to collect in the year, is calculated on a formula that is assessed valuation times the rate. And the chart that I have up on the screen shows how from 2009, when it reached $1 billion, until 2013, it's been on a steady decline. the assessed valuation has, excuse me. During that decline, we were able to maintain a consistent property tax rate, primarily because that was the same time frame that we started converting debt from being paid by property taxes to being paid by the utility fund, which is where the money was spent. Terry, if you'd go to the next slide, please. And so what this shows is the property tax history. This is the property tax rate, which is the other half of the formula. The assessed valuation times the rate will give you the total levy. And you can see the trend on that was $1.60 in total, primary property tax rate, and the secondary rate. You can see the secondary rate dropping because of that shift again on the debt service. But the total rate was at $1.60 and $1.42, $1.60. And next year it's proposed at $1.77, 1.7750. That rate, by the way, for those of you with a calculator at home, is the rate per $100 of assessed valuation. If it wasn't, then our sales tax numbers would be considerably larger, of course, than they are.
The reason I asked for us to discuss this is because if you're not familiar with the property tax rate and the state statute that allows that 2%, people are going to look at this and say, hey, council, you just raised my property tax. And I was trying to explain to staff today, that's how people look at this. That's the figure, and hey, so if we can talk about what the state has done and about the commercial tax as opposed to residential tax and how this process came about.
If I could go through just a couple more slides on the property tax and then see what of the questions, I noticed several of you have some questions, and then we can come back to any of these slides along the way, but to see if I address them. And if you'd go to the next slide, please, Terry. So the outcome of taking the assessed valuation times the rate becomes what's called the total tax levy. And the primary and secondary tax levy for the existing fiscal year 2012, totaled $10,714,635. Because of some refinancings that we did on some tax-exempt bonds, we were able to lower our debt service and the secondary property tax levy can only be used for debt service. We were able to lower our amount of debt service for next year. So you'll notice for fiscal year 13, that total levy is $10,711,530. In other words, we are basically maintaining it. I guess I can argue we're dropping it, but we're basically maintaining it at the level that it's at today. If we'd go to the next slide, please. So how does that, and these are kind of, I'm going to have one slide after this, and then I hope I've answered a few of the questions, but there will be a couple of more. So at the same time, from fiscal year 12 to fiscal year 13, the medium home value has dropped in value from $133,600, and this is Goodyear numbers, by the way. And this is the entire city, both north and south of the freeway, to $124,100. So the total city property tax expected at these rates then would go on that medium house would go from $213.76 up to $220.28. Now the obvious question is, why did that happen? Why would it be going up if your total levy is the same? And if we go to the next slide, what happens in the next part of the equation is that residential and commercial assessed valuation are not changing at the same rates. For the earlier part of this slowdown, the residential valuations dropped considerably quicker than the commercial assessed valuations. For example, in fiscal year 2009, I believe it was 52% of the levy was residential, 48% was non-residential. As you can see, in fiscal year 12-13, and that should read fiscal year 13, I apologize for that error there, but in fiscal year 12-13, residential has gone down to 48%, non-residential has gone up to 52%. Couple of causes for this, but the primary cause between, you see the two fiscal years, we're showing the current fiscal year, which is 11-12, and non-residential makes up 55% of the assessed valuation in fiscal year 11-12. That goes down to 52% in fiscal year 12-13. That is caused simply by a decline in value of non-residential at a more rapid rate than the residential. From talking to the assessor's office about a couple of months ago, they expect the commercial to continue to decline more dramatically. Now, one thing, and Mayor Lord, you just referred to it a couple of minutes ago, that didn't come into play between these two fiscal years, but will come into play in fiscal year 13-14, is the percentage that commercial is assessed at. Today, residential is assessed at 10% of the full cash value. Commercial is assessed at 20% of full cash value. In fiscal year 13-14, that 20% will drop down to 19.5%. That has the effect of a 2.5% reduction in the commercial assessed valuation. So I just threw a whole bunch of numbers at you to try to answer some of your questions, but I probably created a few more, so maybe I'll break here for some questions that you might have.
Sherry?
Okay, when you talked about the assessor, you have the other slide that you did the handout here with the historical valuations. Do we know, because you hear the news that housing prices are on the upswing and they compare it to like last month, do you know if this is the bottom from the numbers you've been getting from the assessor, or are we going to look at maybe one more year down before they'll start to tick up again?
That's a very good and depressing question.
Do I want the answer, I guess?
Depends. If this is a good news session, no. You don't want the answer. Assessed valuation lags the market. So we've already received preliminary estimates of the total assessed valuation for next year. And that shows that that number that you see for fiscal year 2013, that's just about right on the 600,000, is going to drop about another 5%.
So
down
they're 2
to
years in arrears. So the
Yeah.
assessed valuation is 2 years in arrears.
Correct. Okay. So what's happening in the market today that you're reading about in the paper will start to impact us in fiscal year 14-15.
So from what you're saying with that, and then the numbers what the legislature, the state legislature did to lower the commercial property and the depression on that as well, the homeowners are going to be picking up more of the levy per se in the next couple years because commercial, the state has lowered that percentage.
That would be my estimate, yes.
Joe?
When was the assessment 25%, Larry? Because it's 20 now. So already, it's my understanding the residential's picking up more of its percentage anyway because they had to make up that difference when it dropped from 25 to 20.
The actual rate dropped from 25 to 20. Just a second. I may have. No, I have it prospectively. I believe that it stabilized at 20% for fiscal year, I believe it's fiscal year 2011, and before that it dropped in 0.5% increments. So I'm going to guess somewhere about 2000 to 2001 is when it started dropping and it took 10 years to get down to the 20%.
So there's been a steady shift as a result of our state legislature to shift the burden from commercial to residential for quite a while now. So that's kind of rolling into what we're seeing as we kind of move forward. Also, just want to comment, when you go back to your property tax rates, I think it would be helpful to put the go back one more, to put the total levy up for those years, because I think it's important for our citizens to realize that there for the longest time, we have a water company south of 10, north of 10 was also covering the costs to operate that, because the debt service for both the sewer and the water was in the property tax. A large reason why there's been a significant drop in the levy, and I think it was in 11. When was the first $1.5 million? Was that fiscal year 11 we did that?
Actually, I think a lot of that shift was between 10 and 11. Okay. But to answer, just to give you a couple of those numbers that I have in front of me, the very first column under that total levy would have been 14.9 million.
That's in
then
10?
The next that's in the column for 10, yes.
Okay.
Then the next one, that number was 11.6 million.
Okay. That's what
and
I
then
did.
fiscal year 12 is 10.7 million, as it is in fiscal year 13.
Yeah, it's my understanding the reason for the significant shift downward was the result of now that levy's being paid where it should be being paid in the enterprise fund. So that's also important because it was a fairness issue moving it from, everybody paying for those fees versus those that weren't using it. So the only reason I mention that is you see the rate kind of stable, but in essence we've collected about 30% less. Our levy's been about 30% less since 2010. I think that's important to identify that the actual levy has been significantly less. So.
Go ahead, Larry. Any other questions? Go ahead, Larry.
Okay. You'll recall when Terry talked about the capital improvement plan, and actually I'm going to refer back a couple of weeks ago when you reviewed the entire plan and the sources of funding. One of the reasons that the capital improvement plan is as small as it is that there is no debt financing within the capital improvement plan. There are several reasons for that, and I just want to kind of walk through some of that in this discussion very quickly, if you don't mind.
No. Please do.
First, though, I want to talk about the existing budget and the debt service by bond type. And by bond type, there are a number of different ways that we can issue debt and have issued debt. The largest amount that we have debt service on in this upcoming fiscal year is what are called general obligation bonds. Those are the ones that are backed by the property taxes that we just talked about. You can see the total general obligation bond debt service is $11.7 million. But as we showed you in the previous slide, the total property tax portion of that general obligation bond is about $4 million. The remaining $7.7 million is actually being picked up by either the water and sewer user fees or development impact fees as appropriate. Then I'm going to go counterclockwise to the next one on this chart, which is the improvement district debt, which is approximately $3.5 million, $3.6 million. That, for the benefit of those who don't know what an improvement district is, that is where the improvements are paid for by the property owners. So this has to run through our budget to meet all statutory requirements. But and when I get to the next chart, you'll see it. But the money comes from the property owners, and that's the area surrounding.
That would be the West Core Shopping Center, the infrastructure.
That is correct. All of that shopping center and all of that area, including the areas that have buildings in them within that area. The next one is the Water Infrastructure Financing Authority of about $1.3 million, and that is paid out of the water and sewer funds. Then we have some utility revenue bonds of about $2.3 million. That's also paid for out of the utility funds. and then the Public Improvement Corporation bonds. Those primarily make up the debt service on the ballpark. That's about just over $5 million of that $6.1 million, representing 25% of our total. So if you move to the next one, we show how that is funded by funding source. So $9.6 million of the debt service is being funded by the utilities, and that's out of the operations part or existing cash. And then an additional $1.2 million is funded out of development impact fees. And I'm going clockwise this time just to prove I'm ambidextrous and can go both ways here. So that's 5% of the total. The improvement district then represents $3.6 million or 14% of the total. The secondary property tax shows $4.5 million. That is different than the levy by some money that we received in the bank on the last refinancing that we did that is dedicated for this purpose. And then finally, the general fund, which picks up again, that's the Public Improvement Corporation, which includes the ballpark financing as well as a couple of other issues that we have.
Joanne?
When looking at this chart, by policy or by best practices, would you say that this was a balanced chart, or would you say that in a perfect world you wouldn't have a 24% general fund debt service? Is there something that would be different that we've not thought of in the past of how things are paid for like that, or is this just normal?
I think I would label it a little closer to normal, that allocation. Sometimes the general fund may look a little on the high end as a percentage of it, but that's the source of funding the ballpark. I suppose we could put the ballpark separately, but we wanted to show you where the real money's coming from, not the accounting of it, which is that by itself. I think the secondary property tax, I'm pleased at the level of that's a relatively small percentage of the total in there. Our utility debt structure as compared to our operating revenues is on the high end, and that's because we've been funding over the past about 7 years one heck of a lot of water and sewer infrastructure that's been needed to be able to keep those operations running and supply water and to have sewer for the customers south of I-10.
Joe?
You might want to mention, too, is when you're looking at financial ratios, you look at its revenue source to see if it's out of whack. And if you look at the $6.1 million, the general fund, that's less than 10% of your operating revenue for the general fund. So, I don't know how that compares with other jurisdictions, but this is a pie of how it's all get paid. What you want to do is look at the revenue source where it's coming out of to see if that's out of norm. And I think, like Larry mentioned, utilities might be a little high, but the general fund, the 6.1, is within our policy of, 10% or less?
That is correct. I should also point out, because this came as a question at our last session, the total of this debt service is about $25 million. The principal portion of it is about $10 million, or about 40% of that total. So that's the principal retirement that we're doing out of there. The council asked for kind of a breakdown of that principal when we had our last discussion, and I didn't want to complicate each of these wedges by showing principal versus interest, so I thought just to give you that total amount would cover what you were looking for. Okay, if you go to the next slide. I was asked to once again discuss the set-aside that we've talked about for the funding when the principal payments start. For the ballpark financing, we are doing interest only. It's been $5.3 million a year for fiscal year 13. It'll be a little less because of the refinancing that we did, but it will go back up to the $5.3 million here in another year or so. And in fiscal year 19, we start making principal payments, and that was the time originally scheduled for the payments from the Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority. Those payments may or may not be available for us at that point in time. A lot of factors will change, but indications today are that those will be a little bit delayed in coming. City Council asked for a plan of how we're going to address this as we get towards fiscal year 19. What we talked about doing is, and this budget reflects this, is starting in fiscal year 13, we are building a surplus in of 1/7 of the amount of that principal that or payment that we will need in fiscal year 19. So that 1/7, for round numbers, is about $700,000. And so there will be a structural surplus of $700,000 this year. Next year in the budget, we will have a structural surplus of $1.4 million and so forth until we get to fiscal year 19, when we'll need that structural surplus to balance out the budget and to be able to show that, or to be able to pick up all of the principal payments without a drastic impact on the general fund budget. Keep in mind that the lines that we're showing on this chart, the revenue lines and the blue expenditure lines, are just one scenario that really aren't important. This is to illustrate what's going to happen. If the revenue lines go up faster, the blue line can go up faster, but the red box will not change. That will stay the same. If the revenue lines don't go up as fast, the red box again will remain the same.
Well, I, for one, want to thank council, the members that were insistent. I think, Joe, you were one of them, insistent on figuring out something. I think your background in city finance management helped. But I thank staff for coming up with this, because it's a great relief to all of us. And I think it demonstrates the city's responsibility financially. To me, this is a good news story, and this is one of those good news stories I'd like to see out in the paper once in a while and among our neighborhood and in conversation, because this really shows the dedication of the staff and the council towards making sure that our future councils will be more secure financially, and the city will be more secure financially. Okay. Yes, Joe?
No, I can't say how thrilled I am to see this, because I've been asking for it, and I'm a firm believer. We may not be here, but I don't want somebody else to have to deal with something that we could have addressed. So I really appreciate this effort and this plan, because the best case scenario is, if for some reason the Sports Authority comes up with the money at that time, I'm sure there'll be something that money can be used for.
Might build that city center.
You never know. But the fact that you have it there and you're not counting on them, I really appreciate the plan. Thank you.
Sherry?
And just so people listening may not have heard this before, this does not include the mall in your projections, right?
That's correct.
So if the mall comes online, that line just moves good for us, but it's built in without the mall?
That's correct. The green line moves, but the red box stays the same.
And with the green line, it looks like you've used very, I want to say, conservative projections on growth.
That's correct. This is really consistent with the financial forecast that I think Terry went over with you either earlier this year or last fall.
Sherry, thank you for bringing up that point about the shopping center.
Okay. And then finally, as we talk about debt, yeah, go ahead. As we talk about debt, there are really, on general obligation bonds, there are three things that we have to look at on debt. On the rest of the debt, there's only one. But I'm going to go through the three on the general obligation bonds, and then I think the one on the rest of the debt becomes very obvious. The general obligation bonds, we're subject to two statutory requirements and one policy requirement. The statutory requirements are limitations on what we can issue based on the constitutional limits. And you hear these referred to as the 6% and the 20% limits. And we go through this periodically, but as there are new people on the council, I don't remember. I think we went through it last fall a little bit, but maybe just for a little clarification. On the 6% and the 20% limit, we would be able to borrow at least 35.8 million up to about 38 million, depending on the type of project, based on the limitations, because it takes your assessed valuation and it calculates what, against the existing outstanding debt. And this is the amount we could borrow within the next 12 months, even if the assessed valuation drops the subsequent year. The second limitation is voter authorization. And voter authorization, we have unissued debt of $167 million in a number of different categories. So why didn't we expand the capital improvement plan this year? Why is there only $4.3 million to spend this year when we could go out and borrow that kind of money? And that comes into the third one. And to put it in English, and then it affects all of the types of debt that are available to be issued, is to issue the debt, we have to have a source of repaying the debt. In general obligation bonds, what that would mean is that we would have to increase the tax levy to issue more, and the City Council has given direction that you do not want to increase the tax levy to increase or to provide more debt. In other types of debt, the only type of debt that would work then under the same basic philosophy would be any type of debt that would be self-sustaining. So if there's a revenue source that can pay back the debt, then that can be considered. But outside of that, and I'm really talking generically as I see it for the next 5 years, that's what I see the debt picture to be for the city of Goodyear. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions?
On
Bill?
the debt.
How far are we into this? Do you feel
We're ready for the questions either on the book or on tonight's
I
presentation.
think they're asking, some council people are looking very uncomfortable and asking for a break. So could we just take a 5-minute break here? Is 5 minutes enough? Or, all right, 5-minute break. Before we begin the discussion and the questions you have on this, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager. He has some information for us.
Thank you, Mayor. You had asked a question, how many viewers did we have at Granicus for the public budget meeting that we had last Wednesday? City Clerk's office was able to confirm that we actually had 3 viewers of Granicus on the day of the public budget meeting. We don't know if they were viewing the actual meeting itself or we're looking at other presentations that are saved on Granicus. Okay. The following day, we had 25.
Good.
So, again, we don't know if they were looking specifically at that meeting or any other previous meetings, but those were the numbers.
May I suggest, do we publish when we tell them about our budget process and dates, have we ever done an ad in the paper that actually put the dates down like you show us each budget meeting and what's going to be explained? Do we do that in the paper, or we just, well, it could be in the West Valley View, it could be Arizona Republic, it could be in, what I'm saying, at a schedule like we get. Have we used that as an advertisement?
We do not. We currently just publish on the website.
Could I suggest that we do that? So that when people can, there's certain parts of the budget that interest people, that they may come because it's going to cover a certain part of it.
You mean the dates?
Yes, the dates and the one at the beginning that Terry, I think it would be beneficial and do that as soon as we have that, start publicizing that in the papers and in the In Focus and what in Viva and any of the magazines. But in the magazines, you have to have it a certain date earlier on, so you have to be sure you get in very early, and sometimes that doesn't always, you can't always meet the deadline.
Well, the In
I would just like to continue and encourage people to take part in this. Okay, all right, let's, now, I know a number of you have questions, so could we do this? If your question is similar to your question, then you join in that conversation.
Good idea.
While that question's being asked. So, Joe, I'll start with you tonight. And so, your first question on, we're going to be discussing the budget, the draft budget book.
Well, I was handed all the answers to my questions, so I haven't had a chance
Well-
to look at them. So should I just throw the question out to see if anybody else had
Yeah,
anything
I
similar?
think, you know,
Okay.
part of this also is information for whomever is watching. And so even if you know the answer and staff has gotten to you, I had many questions this morning, and I already got my answers and so forth, but
Well, I tell you what, why don't you start with somebody else? And
all
then
right,
if I'm
Joanne,
missing
would you
one,
like
then
to
I can-
start? You're on my right.
Well, mine are by page. I
That's
put
fine. I
notes
think that
per
helps to
page.
know pages. And I think, I read Joe's, yours are by pages too.
I don't mind doing this, but I hate to take up everybody's time this way.
If you don't want to
they're-
take some
they're
time, then you
simple.
could do it after the meeting or make an appointment with so I'm going to leave that up to you. This is your time to discuss. If you would rather do this on some of these questions, maybe that would be good on some of your questions, on some of those other questions you might want to bring forth tonight. So, because to go page by page would be, take this, I don't
Exactly.
think that's necessary
Out of
tonight.
149
Out of
pages.
140, I don't think. Our job is to, during the week, is to, this is online now, right? This is draft online? The draft budget? Okay, it's online, so people can be reading it, that, we can be studying it, and we can be going into staff and set time aside. So, let's just do those things that are just burning issues that you want to ask a question tonight on.
Okay. Well, is this on? Okay. My first begins with actually the mayor and council operating budget, and this is something that I know we've talked about needing to discuss, and I don't see it within here, but it says the operating budget is $250,000, and
Can I ask what page you're on?
page 14.
10.
Oh, I'm actually on my computer, so you know what?
It's 10.
On my
You're in this
computer.
book.
I mean, my iPad.
No, I'm on the iPad too, so what is it on the iPad?
It was page 14.
Thank you.
Our total budget of $250,000, and majority of that is the personnel, and then it says contractual commodities.
No.
That's not my page.
Is that page 15?
This one?
No, it's page 14.
Here, Joe.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Page 11 in the hard book.
I'm going to hard book.
We had what I do not know what contractual expenditures are within the mayor and council operating budget. I also do not know where our actual travel budget is part of. We've discussed that issue with classes or travel that the council takes, or going to conferences, things like that, what that actual budget is and where does that lie. And also this $250,000 initiative budget for council, or whatever you call it, where is that also? Because that obviously isn't part of this.
Okay, and as I work through the questions, I'm going to try and remember what you're asking and address them, and if I don't hit on one, just ask me again. First off, I'm going to do...
Sure, bring that microphone to you.
I'm going to talk about, I'll just define the categories so you know, and then I'll explain a little bit about how the budgets are set up, and that may answer broad questions on where stuff is. All the personnel services include all of the salaries, any of the information that you have heard presented by the HR department, as well as things such as our retirement plans, if they get uniform allowances, anything that's related to a person would be categorized in personnel services. The second one is contractual services. The definition of that is when we pay somebody else to do something for us. So we contract a service out. Number of large ones that we use would be, example, landscape services, janitorial services. We also categorize in there when we buy water and electrical. Those are two large ones, and I guess you could kind of argue we're buying a commodity, but for our chart of accounts, those are also included in contractual services. So for the mayor and council, the largest part of that, and I just got to go, forgive me here, I got to go to the detail and look up, what makes up contractual services for each particular budget that you may have a question on.
Take your time.
And so the question is, the budget for mayor and council runs right around the contractual services is about $70,000. This does include the travel money that you were talking about, not only travel, but for conferences, any training that you would have. It's very minimal for the other things that are included in there. Internet services that will be provided, community relations, which are your discretionary funds, phone services, dues and memberships, meeting expenses, things such as that. We did include, there is additional funding that was put in for a supplemental request so that you, as a group, were allowed to, I believe it was based under attending 2 of the conferences for the ICMA, the local and the national. So there has been funding included in the base budget for that.
And the 250,000. What is it called?
Council initiatives.
We have, and we've had discussions on this. I'll try and explain this again in a $192 million budget kind of simply. There's another department that is called non-departmental, and we put budget in there, items that really don't belong to another department, and there's a couple reasons for doing this. And one is when we cost things out, so we want to know what the council activity cost, or we want to know what financial activity costs. Some of these other expenses that we have really aren't directly related to that. So we've created this non-departmental, and that is where the grant funding comes out of, where you pay a lot of your nonprofits. And then what was the item you just asked about? The initiative money is in there. We also have ACTAV incentive payments that come out of there. The reimbursement to the developers, we have contracts or negotiations when the developers come into town and we have sales tax reimbursement. Those payments are put in there. We also carry, sometimes we have one-time programs that will be in this non-departmental activity, if you will, such as like the VISTA program, and we carried that for a couple years. So again, it's costs that aren't really attributable to a specific activity, and so that's where the initiative money is.
Thank you.
Next question.
Can I follow up on that?
You certainly can, Sherry. Go ahead.
And I don't know if we'll see the trend, because I know you put stuff with different departments. For the salaries, it went from 313 to 175, and then we had 3 people, executive assistant, assistant to council, assistant to mayor, and it looks like those were all moved, because I know they're reorganizing that to another department, but there says no positions but 175,000, so I'm a little confused.
Okay, and overall, I'll try and again explain some overall concepts that may answer some of the questions up front. For the positions right off, we did not increase the position count. We started at 511 and we remain at 511. You will see positions within the budget that have made transition. They either went from one division within a department to another division. That will change. That will have a material change in the personnel services line items. And I know Councilman Pizzillo had a number of questions that were pertaining to that. The other thing is if a position was slated in a previous year as unfunded and now it's funded, the FTE count will not have changed for that particular division or department, but now the dollars would have changed. To answer your specific question, in the mayor council, a couple things went on. We had the position for, it's Parrish's position, the assistant, council assistant is what it's called. That position is now funded under a newly created division, kind of constituent services, intergovernmental programs. And so that position moved. We also added funding in there for a position to assistant to the mayor. So that was unfunded, but in the count, but now funded. There are no regular full-time employees within the city council budget anymore. The secretarial position, the support position also moved, correct, to the intergov programs division. What you see are the stipends and the costs associated with the 7 council positions themselves.
Next question. Joanne? Oh, Wally?
Yeah. Would you tell me again where you said you were going to put the grant money? The community grant money? Where is that?
That resides in non-departmental.
So,
and those are called community relations, and there's a program that we run, a whole process that we run where we allocate funding or award funding to a number of nonprofits.
I understand that, but where would I find that line item in this budget book?
I don't know if.
And you don't. And you know what? Tell me later. Tell me later.
Yeah, because I
don't
think
need
it's
to know
in this
now.
budget book.
Yes,
It may not be in this budget book. It may be in the other big budget book.
Yeah.
It will be included. It's in the summary. It doesn't really represent a department, so it doesn't have the same format. It's not going to have FTs. It won't have goals and objectives or accomplishments. It's line item, account codes.
Okay.
Okay, and it is in the summary, which is on my page 5. You'll find it. It's department number 1900.
Okay.
So it's in, right, and we included in the majority of that $2 million is the developer, the sales tax reimbursement. Most of that is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll talk to you later, Terry.
I can provide the detail for that.
Thank you.
Joanne?
Well, I'm wondering, since we just received this book tonight, I'm wondering if I should go through this and match up to see if that will give me some more clarifications before I sit here going,
Okay.
page. What do you think? I don't know. I mean, like, for example, my next question was to do with the city clerk's department, and we had a major increase, and I know we're going into an election year, but I was wondering from 2010 to 2012, it's over 100,000 more increase, and I was wondering if that had something to do with the potential of the election change within the legislation. I just was, some of these questions are like that. What's the majority of the big change here? And but maybe line items are more in this book that I haven't seen yet. No.
And I can. I think that, Joe, maybe this may be, Councilman Pizzillo, this might be, maybe this is a good way to ask your questions, because I think you hit on all the top variances. As we went through the budget process, we, again, had the budget briefings that went through the line item discussions on each department. We talked about key drivers, the largest expenses, what does it cost for them to provide the service they provide? And we did that early on, I believe, in February, March. Then we had a discussion on, and I believe we provided a book and a supplemental request on additional funding that was affordable and that was recommended to be funded this year. A number of the increases are directly related to those items. You're going to see, good example in Rourke's budget, you're going to see $100,000 more for legal services. We had a substantial increase in utilities in a number of areas, parks, things like that. Fire got $100,000 and some for vehicle repairs and maintenance that went up. And so overall, a lot of the questions that came forward from Mr. Pizzillo were because of the supplemental increases. The other were changes in salaries, in the positions moving from one place to another would always create a large variance. So I'm happy to answer any of your questions specifically you have, or perhaps maybe, Mr. Pizzillo, if we want to go down your list, that kind of picked up the largest ones.
I could do that. I'm just wondering if there's more value in putting all of these questions together and getting one general sheet that you
That's
can
what- that's what I
disseminate among
feel.
all the
I feel.
council members instead of trying to, go line by line on it. I don't,
Thank you. I think I would like to see you handle it that way, and I appreciate the suggestion. So, council, each of you will get your questions together in a written form, and we'll give them to the city manager, and he can take it to Terry, and then get it answered, and you can decide if you need to meet with Terry one-on-one, or if is through whatever media.
Could I ask a question? I know, Councilman Pizzillo, when you sent that in, a couple things that would help to clarify is if you could identify if you're using a budget number, an estimate, or the current budget number. So if you can just think in terms of, was it from the 12 budget to budget, because a lot of the questions were that, or from the estimate of this year to next year. And then the other thing is, Councilman Pizzillo, for the format that you see in front of you, quickly looking at that, is that adequate for the information, do you think?
somewhat when you're looking at personnel as I look at it, but I think some of the details on the contractual, you might want to expand a little bit more, okay, on the definition. And I'll just give one example because I don't want to go over there, but one of the questions I had was in the city clerk is that the contractual service went up 191,000, and I could identify 145 of it as election related, but I didn't see any supplementals for the additional, $40-some thousand. So my question was, what was that? So, just a description on those type of things I think will help probably the rest of the council as well when you go there. But I think a consolidated list of all the questions that everybody knows, and we could have, I'm sure me and the vice mayor have some of the same questions she was mentioning is on here. I think it'll save us all time instead of trying to go line by line through all of this.
Great. Anything else with this meeting? City manager? Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. Bill?
Yeah, not into specific questions, but there's some, I'm going to say inconsistency because I don't know a better word, and here's my example. This is the page that I have open. This is the city attorney's office. Page 29 in the book, which happens to be the one that I have open. This lists the positions within the city attorney's office, very specifically who they are. And then if you go to the next page that I flipped to, which was page 50, just randomly, which is technical and support services for IT, it just says total full-time people 5. And the book kind of goes through that way. Some departments it lists specifically what the positions are, and others just give totals. And I think it would be very helpful if we had, at least for me, all of the positions listed. Either just a total number of FTEs. You could just say 511 and we'd all call it good. But I think given the number of reorganizations that are going on and the things that are changing within the city, I think it's important for all of us to know within this budget book exactly which positions are being assigned to exactly which divisions within the city.
And we can absolutely do that. In addition to that, we have 2 supplemental schedules that come forward at the tentative budget that we can put out earlier that list all the positions. That's what the schedules are for.
That probably
they
would
list
be
the
helpful.
positions by department, any changes, and then year-over-year changes.
Bill, you had another question.
Yeah, I did have a second question, but Terry, I'm wondering if I'm not sure if that's going to cover it. Does that get to the level of detail that was in that?
The Schedule 5,
Schedule does?
right. We've
Okay.
kind of overhauled that and added all the schedules by department and changes year over year.
but, and I guess I'm going to drive to, does, like within IT, for example, there's a number of divisions within IT. So if it just says IT and it lists those positions, we still don't know what division they're in because they're separated out in the budget book. Does that make sense? So if the schedule,
We will list the divisions.
you will, okay.
We will.
Then that
Yeah,
covers
if
it.
not so, it's different than the current book. It's been expanded to include position type. And the idea is if we had a position that was a staff assistant, and now it's called something different so that you can follow that through and pick up any changes of movement. I believe we've discussed the movement of the InterGov program, and so you can actually track the positions. They came from maybe 3 different places. You should be able to track reductions where they came from, and then additions to where they came to.
Okay,
Or
that
went
helps with
to.
that. My second question then kind of goes in the same line, and I hate to put the police chief on the spot because I know he's going to come before us, but there's been a tremendous reorganization within PD budget-wise, so it's very difficult to tell where things were to where they are now. Is there a way to, and I don't know if it's helpful or not, but is there a way for us to get a side-by-side comparison of what was and what is?
By positions,
Yeah,
yes, this schedule will do that by position.
and it'll help show us that moving part.
I can produce for you, in addition to, if it will help, we can provide the divisional budgets comparative year over year by division. This is intended to do that, but it's not. I'll have to stack them, summarize them. It's intended to do it by division so that you see the goals, objectives, accomplishment. It kind of isolates. It's intended to do it at a detailed level, but we can summarize that. I think I understand what you're asking.
Okay, I think you get it too. Okay, I'm good.
Joe?
No, I was just going to say, I know there was a point, and I think it's the same thing that you're talking about, where you'll see all the detail, you'll see the movement by division, and then it should all total 511, because that's the authorized positions when it all gets down to the bottom. The toughest part is going to be is if they're in a whole new division, and I'm not sure how I'm trying to visualize that, how you show that, because you'll see nothing here, but you'll see somewhere else. You'll still tile it in 111, unless you have some footnotes that says this moved to, X. I think that's what he's kind of...
Right, there's
Yeah.
a column that would indicate change.
Okay.
Joanne?
I will save most of my questions for later, Terry, to ask you. But one specific, though, and Wally had began it, and that has to do with the department budget for bulk trash. It actually, the budget here shows an increase for public works and sanitation. So I didn't know if this was made before we had made the discussion of changing it to monthly, because it actually, and this is page 123, and 2011, 2012 estimate was 4.5, and now the budget for 12-13 is 4.6. So,
Madam Mayor and council persons, there are a number of things going on in here. We do have a very complicated personnel model, and until that discussion had taken place, this is a draft budget and is put together. We will be adjusting the personnel part of that, the savings down. And then the other thing on there is that the contractual services is actually going up to reflect the contract cost. So the majority of the savings in the program is within, the majority actually is within the fleet services, the trucks are not using and what have you, and then the other part is going to be in personnel cost savings.
Okay, are we finished with our questions? We have, well,
We're supposed to get information to the city manager. We
Terry,
should probably have
when is the best, how soon do you need this information? Because you know the progress of the budget and how you're putting it together, so.
That's absolutely fine.
Is it possible to have it by the end of the week? Does that give council enough time
I
in
think they
fairness
should
to
be
you?
able to, heaven's sakes, yes, they've got most of their questions already written down. I think that's,
And then do we need another session prior to the tentative, or should we be able to address it through yellow paper, email.
Great question. If council wants to have more time to meet and go through those questions, and then we're going to have to push that up a little bit. May 21st is the date that we're going forward on the tentative budget. So if you wanted to try and do anything next Monday, we would have to have that probably by Wednesday, so give you some time to be able to come up with what the answers are. Or we can provide it to you via yellow paper or some other method to do that. The other thing I'd suggest is we do have some of the questions already. We can get those out to you so you can look at what has already been submitted by Councilmember Pizzillo. Councilmember Stipp, I don't know if you've submitted or you just hand wrote yours down. But anything we can do to share amongst each other as you're going through this, it'll save you some time. But it really is up to council if you want to talk about this publicly next Monday, or you'd rather just get answers to your questions, hard copy, or just one-on-one meetings.
Joe?
The only question I have is we'll be voting on the 21st on the tentative budget. In my perspective, I don't know how the others feel, it would be nice, because you've got some of these questions on there, is to have that discussion before the tentative vote to see if anything needs to be changed. Because once you do the tentative, as you know in the past, it's pretty much the budget. So if there's some questions that need to be asked, and I just throw that out to the colleagues here, is would it make more sense next Monday if we could get that book before the meeting to see if any of those things can get ironed out, so that when you get to the tentative for the vote, you're not going back and forth in the detail of the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let him check with the city clerk a moment. But
If I can just add,
yes.
We've designed the budget calendar so that we're adopting the tentative, which sets the maximum expenditure authority that you can have for the following fiscal year. We could not increase the number once that's set. Again, we can move things around, and we've left a month between the 21st and the 25th just exactly for that. So if there are any changes, there's enough time.
It's just the amount you can't change. Once
You could
take the
not
left.
exceed
We
that
can't exceed the
amount.
total, but we can still move stuff around, right?
Right.
So maybe the 21st would be, I mean, it would be still nice to have that book for that discussion on the 21st before, the 21st. So you can't move it around, but I guess the discussion on the 21st on the tentative would be some of the issues and the amounts that are in there. I assume that's correct. I
I'm going
don't
to ask
know. I
Brian.
just don't.
Brian would
yeah.
like to address this in a moment. Brian, go ahead.
Going to say a couple of things. If you do it on the 14th, we have CFDs that evening. That starts at 5 o'clock work session, and it's on the 21st, excuse me. So, and then you roll right into the regular meeting right after that. So we'd have to start that meeting if you, in fact, you want it before tentative, to be 4 o'clock or some such time, and that'd be up to council if that works for you. You're right. The tentative budget sets the upper expenditure limitations. We have every ability to do some modifications. Granted, it gets the budget pretty much done at that point, but if there are some subtle changes and things between there and final budget adoption, it'd give us a chance to do that.
Seems to me I don't get the idea that they want to change the amount. They just have questions on
More questions.
on clarification on to understand the budget. So I'm not getting that. Am I correct in that assumption here?
I would say typically, yeah, but if there's I'm going to say an aha moment in that discussion that says, hey, wait a minute, did we really say yes to this? And maybe we want to rethink that. That changes that amount.
Well,
We have enough time on the 21st to do that, though, I would think, or no? That's what the...
I don't know that's the I mean, this is going to be my first.
Brian, would you like to
Go
make
around.
a comment to that? Or Terry?
Technically, did you have time to change it? A couple of things that I would prefer that you all have an understanding of putting the budget together and the confidence that when you're voting on the tentative, that we don't have major changes. Again, it sets the expenditure limit at the top end. I will tell you there are some placeholders in there, and we can make changes. We have contingency amounts in there. We do a budget again, as we adopt it and it takes place in July, we can adjust the budget. So it's not as if you're putting it in concrete. The other thing I'll bring out is we put this together. It's a balanced budget that we brought forward together with you. The intent is on the tentative date to provide to you all the formal schedules that are required by law that, if you will, demonstrates and proves out the balanced budget. Keep in mind the revenue sources that back the expenditures have all been balanced too. And so I am putting that together or out before you because we've been discussing all the elements of the budget. I think it's important to get the questions answered. I just don't feel that you're going to have major changes, and if you do, we're probably able to do that on the tentative budget date.
Yes, Gary.
In previous budgets, and you just brought that up in your answer, but in previous budgets several years ago, we had some serious placeholders. I remember seeing $40 million placeholders that were put in the budget so that we would have the ability to, if the money showed up, spend the money, even though we didn't anticipate coming. What I would like to know is, what is the dollar amount of your placeholders in this budget? And just so that I have a feel for if you have to move things around, because once you pass the budget, that sets your top limit. But you can always move things around as long as you've budgeted and have a placeholder.
City Manager would like to answer that?
I'm going to go back to, I really think that there'll be enough questions that we ought to do a work session this coming Monday. That's the 14th. We do not have one set up right now. We have a regular council meeting. Okay. And if we get questions by Wednesday, it'll give staff an opportunity to try and answer the bulk of those, or maybe some will have to have some follow-up. Pardon me? Okay. But it would give us a chance to, as a group, have you discuss those, understand it. Terry's absolutely right. The budget is one of the most important public policies decisions made by this council. We want to make sure that you're getting the information you need to vote how you see fit. So I would suggest we do it on the 14th, this coming Monday, and we just have to have questions by Wednesday. If we could have them by noon Wednesday, that would be terrific.
It
and
shouldn't
give
be
us
difficult to do because they have the
opportunity
questions
to
in
have
front of them,
those
many of them
answers
do.
to you.
And so that's your responsibility to get those questions in, meaning that's your deadline, okay? I just met Bill. Joe had it first. Joe?
Just real quick, it was nice to have, and the reasons why you got the questions earlier, it was nice to have the draft and the drop down Friday before the Monday meeting, so you had the weekend. I guess my question on the 21st, you'll also have another budget book that's more complete than this one. It'll have the, all the positions, and it'll be more detailed than this one. Am I correct, Terry? The tentative budget book will
That
be
is
more deep?
correct. In addition
Okay.
to that, it will have the legal requirement statement forms.
It would be nice, and again, I know this is a moving target with depending on what happens Monday, but if we could have it late Friday, the book again downloaded like you had this time, so that we come prepared when the discussion on the tentative at that point is. And I'm hoping that we can do that because that's very helpful to have that and get that stuff, because she's already given me the stuff back that I asked for, and so I was prepared for tonight. So I think there's value in having that draft book, before we come Monday, as opposed to hand it out Monday. So,
Bill? Oh, excuse me.
Just for clarification,
Yes.
you're talking the Friday before the 21st tentative
Yes,
budget
yes,
adoption,
yes, yeah.
not to be confused with the work session we're proposing for this coming Monday. Okay.
Bill?
If we can get the answer to Councilman Pizzillo's questions, I have a feeling that's going to answer 99% of what I've already got. So it may not be necessary
Well,
to
you
regenerate.
determine that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But if we can get those, which would mean tonight or first thing tomorrow morning.
Councilmember Stipp, we can get those out first thing in the morning. We've already responded to the questions, so it's just a matter of sending them on to council first thing in the morning.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I think this brings this one to an end. I do want to explain something to you. you have some comments to make? All right, go ahead,
Just
City
summary.
Manager, before I go ahead.
Just summary. Want to make sure we're on the same page. I'll get
Thank
through
you.
this very quickly. One is just summary of the work session. We will be getting a legal opinion on the liquor license renewals and what other cities are doing, their policies on renewals. We'll also have a little bit of a look at what the cost of service for administration is, if we can get that as well. We'll certainly have that to you as soon as practical. We'll let you know when that happens. Council initiatives, there will be about $200,000 will be carried over. That will be the amount council will have. That can be a discussion this fall to include monument signs and other items that you'd be looking at to use those dollars for. I did want to point.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt there. If any of you had some burning issues of other elements that you'd like besides those two, would you put that in your paperwork that you give to the staff, okay? So that we won't have that discussion again. You'll have it'll be a part of that discussion.
Yes, and then there's a question on the effluent reuse line. One of the things that we'll be looking at as we do our water resource master plan, we'll be looking at water resources in terms of a long-term planning. It will absolutely look at those elements. So what we'll do when we get to the fall, we're looking at council initiatives. We'll also break out some of those items like reuse lines that would be funded by a different area, because that's a lot more capital intensive, and we also have to look at the sustainability of our water resources. So that'll be in there. You're asking for, when we get to that point, we'll be providing updates on the enterprise software replacement. That's going to be several weeks down the road, couple months down the road, I should say. Looking at publicizing dates for budget work sessions and public meetings, and that's just to expand it beyond what we do now, make it more available to the public. We've already talked about council submitting the questions by Wednesday, and some of the details on the positions that will be done and schedules that will be created by finance. That's all I have.
Well, just, we all have a special meeting after this, so we're not done, you know that. But I do want you to know there's a little change in order. We were notified or I was notified in special meetings that we need to do the pledge and the invocation, just like you would a regular meeting. So when I call this to order, we will have that process first. We'll do a roll call, and then I'm going to ask for a motion and a second into an executive session. So that's kind of what, and you're staying, I decided we'll stay right here rather than move everything. So any other questions before I adjourn this meeting? Meeting adjourned.